All right, hello everyone. Today we have willbadie here with me. We're going to talk about the effects of religion on the general population. So why don't we get started? Thought the first thing
Sounds
we would
good.
do would be talk about how you grew up in a religious atmosphere and how it affected you in a positive and negative way.
Uh, I grew up in a non-denominational family. Like my family was Baptist at one point in time, but uh, I eventually ended up going to all different kinds of churches. So uh, I saw a lot of good things. I saw a real sense of community. It was like there was actually people who cared about you, and it was awesome from that aspect. And as time went on, you get older, and uh, eventually you start to realize that uh, people, specifically older people, can tell you things that aren't true. Um, you go to school and you learn that the earth is billions of years old, and then you go somewhere and they tell you that the earth is 6 to 10,000 years old. When you start having those discrepancies, uh, you start to question, well, who's right, and you investigate those things. So uh, when I was growing up, I was pretty much involved in church, maybe 2 times a week, Wednesday and Sundays. But when I was growing up, I believed it. I was, even though I don't think that I uh, put as much time into it as some people do. Like, some people try to, out Christian you to say, well,
Yeah.
you know, it, you weren't really a real Christian. I was there every day, and it's like, even though I didn't give it all my time, I still believed it. I believed it to the point where I remember there was a time maybe when I was around 10, 11 or something like that. And I I couldn't go to sleep. Like it was the beginning of my insomnia because I believed that the world could possibly end every night. And I was like, man, I don't want to be asleep if the world ends. Like, but they really drove it home. They'd be like, well, no man knows the hour. And I was like, you're right. And I was like, neither do I. So I'm gonna just stay up. Like, I don't know. Like, I would listen out in the distance for trumpets because they said that trumpets were gonna be blown. I'm like, man, once them trumpets go off, there's dragons coming.
It's over.
There's a bunch of. One of the scariest things I ever did was probably read the Book of Revelations when I was like, I must have been somewhere around 11 or 12, and you know to when you grow up and they say everything in this book is true and you believe that, and then you read of something that's coming that everybody always thinks that they're going to be a part of the time when the world ends. So I'm like, man, I could be they said dragons are coming and people are going to disappear. Like, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going to happen. And that really affected me. So
It's going to be a battle on Middle Earth, right?
yeah, like it makes Middle Earth look like, child's play. They got their fire lakes and people getting cast into it, and I'm like, what is going on here? But I believed that. I believed it to the point where it created a complex. It really made me scared for the future, so to speak. And those are the kinds of things that I think people kind of overlook. I'm very much about the effects of this on children, because as a child, your mind is susceptible to so much.
You're very impressionable.
Very impressionable because my children are 2 and 1, so I'm watching the beginning of life and the way that they pick things up at an early age. And that's all, watching them, I realized that that's all that you actually do in life. You go through life watching people who've done things and you copy them and you say, well, does this work for me and stuff. And for something like religion, most people, I'd say, pick it up from their parents, and you don't even know how long back in history that actually goes. I've often thought I might be the first person in either side of my family's lineage to say that he wasn't a Christian, and who knows how long. You really know how long people have been practicing this kind of stuff.
Okay. So the other thing I thought is you wanted why this is important to you. Obviously, we kind of talked about that a little bit, but I know this is a pretty important subject to you personally. And how it affects children. A lot of it too is I think when kids are young, like I said, they're very impressionable, and it's hard for them to understand that this is the way it has to be done, and there's no other way to be done for it to be done. So it's a form of control also.
It's absolutely a form of control.
So, I mean, that's one big thing. You should probably talk about how, when you were younger growing up and then how you got, came over, moved here.
Okay. My entire life until I was about, I'd say 18 or 19 or so, I would have considered myself a Christian to varying degrees. I believed it a little bit more at other times than some. And when I was growing up, I think one of the most formative things that happened was my grandmother. She passed when I was 11, and I found her body. I was the one to find her body. So we were in a house by ourselves, and there was this thought that came to my head that there was a time where I thought there was two people in that house, and I came to find out actually I was the only living person in that house. And that started this question in my head, and I was, well, where did my grandmother go? Because then I'd go to church and I'd listen to what people said about, well, she's in heaven now and all this stuff. And I really just didn't buy it. I didn't buy that she was walking on gold streets somewhere in the clouds with some sort of spirit body thing. Because her body's there.
Right.
You know what I mean? She didn't take that with her.
Right.
I don't know how you have spirit feet or whatever, but her body was there. I touched it. I felt that it was still warm. So her body was still there. So where is she? And what is she? What am I talking about? My it's almost kind of like coming across like a broke down car. At one point in time there was power in this car.
Right.
So it's like, here's this corpse, and I'm like, well, what was my grandmother? Because whatever this, this body is, it's not her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's not her. Like, there was something that animated her, so to speak,
I always find it kind of interesting, like the different religions of how they try and talk about what happens after you die.
Yeah.
Right? The reincarnation, all these different things. Like, it's always kind of interesting to me. People
say so many different things about it. And that in that event, it kind of plunged me into this. I started looking into all different kinds of things after that. And I would still, I still would call myself a Christian. And then as time went on, and really what was going on is I was just becoming more educated about the cultures and religions of the world. And I was humanizing them and actually saying, okay, you have something to teach me. Just in the same way that I would never say that I didn't learn anything from Christianity. Mm-hmm. I've learned all kinds of things that I find valuable from Christianity. But, sometimes I ask Christians, like, well, did you ever, look into maybe like what the Hindus think, or maybe like what, some Zoroastrian is, and
Yeah.
have you ever gone into it? And a good deal of them will be like, well, no, I can't look at that. I'm very skeptical of things that tell you not to acquire knowledge.
Absolutely.
Anything that's trying to tell you that you shouldn't,
anything
learn
that's
something.
trying to tell you that they are the Almighty and everything else is inferior.
Yeah,
is a problem. It's
a problem. And when it comes to religion, you have the situation where you have these. I don't think people always think of religion as a entity of power in the world, but it absolutely is.
Absolutely.
I was just watching something about Scientology the other day. In 1955, that's a year before my dad was born. But in that span of time that my dad's been alive, a religion got enough power to go to war with the IRS.
Right. Absolutely.
So what does that mean for something that's been around for like 2,000 years?
Right.
What kind of power is at
Vatican.
The core of that? The Vatican is the perfect example of the fact that people even like the fact that like people like bend down and like kiss the Pope's ring and stuff like, and these are like world leaders and stuff like that. Yeah. The fact that that is happening is proof that it's almost more powerful than the governments of the world.
I think it's a way of they control the world.
They use it
as a tool, and I think they work with each other.
I always think about it as, it's finance, religion, and it's government. It's like a triangle of, this is what constitutes your world. Your world is created by these people. Right. And we live in a world now that there's so many people who are like blatantly against the way that the world functions. And religion, I think, holds people in a place where it's hard to grow. It's hard, it's hard to grow. Just in finding what it's been to openly say that I'm a non-believer, is I understand why people don't do it.
Yeah,
I understand because you literally open yourself up to people attacking you and saying vicious things about you, untrue things about you. Like it's weird.
I remember growing up and thinking to myself, my parents went to church, but I stopped going to church when I was like 10 because I just didn't like it, and I slept the whole time. Yeah. And my mom was kind of embarrassed, so she said, just stay home.
That's how I would do it.
So, worked for me. So I just remember like thinking to other countries, thinking that like we impose that this is the religion of the world. How is that right for other countries? Why shouldn't we all be able to believe in whatever religion we want? We're a country of freedom, right? So we should have equal freedom for everybody, freedom of religion, Yeah. But a lot of people, when I was growing up, I always remember thinking that, like, if you weren't a Christian, you were a bad person.
Yeah.
So I just don't understand that mindset. I have a buddy that goes to church, and like in their church in Christianity, they believe the woman should serve the man. That's their thought process. And they preach that on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And it's like, so you're preaching inferiority to people. And so your kids are growing up to learn that. And it's crazy to me.
When you really get into to the Bible, and definitely like the role of women in the Bible, you start to see the beginnings of social engineering, I think.
I think you're right.
On the level of, okay, you have this woman who's in the Garden of Eden, and this woman is responsible pretty much for the reason why people die in the story. She tells Adam, hey, take this fruit, and they eat it, which is, if you think about it, such an insane concept to think that the worst thing that people ever did was eat fruit off of a tree. It's an insane concept. But anyway, the way that it goes with women is that through the rest of the book, very rarely do you find any women who are of like high prestige or who have real purpose, you know, and that in some places, you know, this is still they still were talking about you can sell your daughter and all like there's it's just like no, the world is too civilized to listen to what some people in the desert were thinking about 2,000 years ago about women and other things, because like you said, I mean, it teaches a supremacy, and that supremacy is not just with women, but then it gets into things like homosexuals, and then people twist it, and it even gets racial.
Yep.
So it gets, you know, that when we look at it, when I look at the text, I say this thing teaches people how to be biased.
I think a lot of times it gives people excuses.
It does.
It gives, you know, I can allow myself to feel that way about a certain person, and I can blame, I read it in a book.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of times people don't actually, it's not so much that they're that religious, but it just gives them a crutch.
Yeah, they say, okay, this is okay and good to demean my wife, right, and to make her feel like she's less than me because I'm following the Bible, and that's how it's supposed to be. And it's
in the Bible, the white man was more important than anybody else, so it's okay that we hold everybody else down.
I mean, the way that they kind of go about it in the Bible is like they almost kind of put it in this place where it's like they don't really talk so much about race outrightly. Okay. They talk about one thing. Not long ago, I had talked to a local pastor, and we started talking. I don't know how I got on the race. I guess really growing up here in Africa, being black and race, it always comes up because people are curious and afraid to have the conversation. And I'm more than willing to have it with people. Yeah. So it got on to the concept of where people come from. You know, we're talking about. He said, "Well, you know where everybody comes from. Everybody came off the ark." That's what he said. He said, "Now the way that's not overtly racial, but how it becomes racial is then people say." In the lore and kind of the lore of it all, because I'm a person who I don't even think that happened. Yeah, you know what I mean. I think you're talking about people in a fairy tale. Yeah, I don't. I don't even think that this. With you. You know, yeah, so absolutely. But then they say, well, Ham, who was one of Noah's sons, mm-hmm. Ham, after Noah, it's such an insane story. It's so wild. Noah gets off of the boat. And his first inclination is, I'm going to get drunk. So he gets drunk and he falls out, I believe, in his tent. And his clothes come up kind of, and he's like exposed. And his son came in and saw his nakedness and he cursed Ham. And then the jump that people make is they say, well, Ham is the progenitor of what the world knows to be as black people. Mm-hmm. So you're black because of a curse that Noah put on you when he got off and was drunk in a drunken rage when he got off the ark about 4,000 years ago. And I'm just like, wait a second. Like, no, like you can't just jump to that. That's the best plausible idea for where I don't really like using the word race because I only believe there's one race of people, right. But where the ethnic types, you know, where different types of people come from, you know, and you know that's just a wild. Like it's a wild. If somebody said that, if somebody had a similar story to that and lived like in the Amazon you'd be like, oh, well, that's clearly some sort of myth. You know, like it's you. I don't know. I wouldn't think it was real.
Right. You try and tell a story to that somebody in Amazon, they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, these people
Like they'd be like, you're crazy. Don't come back here.
And the thing about it is like these stories that you find in the Bible, you start to see where throughout history there's older examples. Like the Sumerians, they had this guy named I think his name was Zisudra. Mm-hmm. And Zisudra was kind of like Noah. He was tasked with building a boat because I think the gods like had saw that they didn't like what was going on, and they like I think in the story like they like kind of like leave Earth and they're just like kind of like chilling up in space or something, and they're just like just do away with all of this. But you start to see that people adapt stories.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. So, and then they become things that some people think are factual.
It's like weird. Mythology, right? So
it's like
Zeus, but when you're growing up and you're in school, they're teaching that was just crazy. That's not true. None of that's true. It's just stories. It's just whatever. How is it maybe that Christianity is not just stories? You know, so we're educated based off of Christianity mindset.
Absolutely, we that's our paradigm. We believe the world. We believe the world is kind of. We see it in like two ways, and that gets into the concept of cognitive dissonance, or the ability to hold contrary ideas in your mind, simultaneously. And so when I was growing up, right, I would go to school and they'd be like, yeah, the Earth's billions of years old. And then in the back of my mind, it would be like, nah, the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And I'm just like, wait a sec. Eventually, you just have to come to grips with this idea. Like, okay, one of you is right and one of you is not right.
Right.
So who's more likely to be right? The people who are telling me a story that in the first part, a snake is talking, or actual people who take the time out to study these things and really like get, geologists and things.
But that's where it comes back to children, right? So you grow up that way, learning that, and you're impressionable, and that's what you're learning. Yeah. So that's why, when it's so important at a young age, imagine if we taught science in the same similar fashion, at a young age, and said, hey, yeah, there's this, or, you didn't learn about, 70,000 people or 70,000 years ago, there was a volcano and, a certain amount of people made it out of one continent. Yeah. And that's where we evolved from.
Yeah. They don't teach, I think, that there's definitely places in the world. Well, not even the world, but I guess in some ways, yes, the world, but more specifically, the country where the things that are being taught to children are things that cannot be substantiated in any way. Right. But they're being learned in a learning environment. They're teaching people things, about the age of the earth and trying to say stuff like, well, there was dinosaurs on the ark and stuff like that. Like they're just trying, they're teaching these in learning environments, and that I think is a very dangerous route to fundamentalism.
I think we're going maybe through a transition in general. Like I believe that maybe we're going through this transition of people are believing less of Christianity and start questioning it more. And that's kind of why we're like in this state of chaos a little bit. Cause people are like, what the heck? This just doesn't make sense anymore. And we're transitioning maybe into the next step, whatever that is.
The way I tried to explain it to my dad is like, I grew up in the age of information where I could literally at the tip of my fingers learn about things that you would have had to rifle through thousands or hundreds of books.
Absolutely.
Maybe. Or just to find access to one book that might say something alternative to what you've been believing.
And you have access that isn't, taken away from you. There's,
Yeah.
some information that they don't allow in certain countries or certain
Yeah.
areas. Now you can, no matter where you are in the world, you can find it somewhere.
I find I have a problem with religion in general that seeks to exclude people from other people.
Absolutely.
And say, because it's not. Of course, I see the same things in Islam. I don't talk about Islam as much because I didn't grow up in Islam. For people who feel somewhat burnt by Christianity, definitely in their youth, and some people don't come to grips with this kind of stuff until much later in their life. There's all kinds of preachers who spend 20, 30 years behind the pulpit only to come out one day and say, I don't really believe this stuff.
Yeah.
So if a person who's been well versed in these kinds of things can say that, I don't think that it's crazy for just a regular person. Right. I'm just a regular person who figured out that I didn't believe this. The wild part about it, I think, is the fact that I convinced myself that I did believe it. For a long time. I didn't really believe it, but I was convinced. I was just like, no, it's okay. Just forget all that stuff you just read and forget everything you just learned. Forget your own original thoughts.
Yeah.
That's the weird part. It's just like it makes you kind of...
You battled your intuition.
Yeah, you battle that's a perfect way of putting it. You battle your intuition. You battle information that comes into the contrary, even though it makes more sense to you that way. And that's a very strange phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an inner battle of you have one train of thought on one side and one train on the other, and it's just and you lean, even though you've grown up in the one side, you lean so much to the other. It's just it's disheartening sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not against them teaching what religion says in school, but I am against them teaching it as if that is the most verifiable truth.
Right.
That you can't outdo science in the sense that, if you're going to say all these things, you should probably have good evidence to support it. But
they don't have to have evidence. You just have to have faith.
You have to have faith, and faith is a very, when I talk to my dad a lot about this, it always comes back to, well, I just have faith in this. And, I always think of atheist Matt Dillahunty. And one thing he always tries to get across to people is that faith is not a good way to get to truth.
Right.
It's just not. It can fail you. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you can have faith in things that do happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean because I've had plenty of faith in things that never came to any kind of fruition. So
if you have faith in tangible things,
yeah,
you can have faith. So, but we're gonna say faith. Let's say like witches or stuff like that. That's no way that can be believable, even though people may have faith in it. Or whatever, that's some form of, maybe not faith, but some form of that way of thinking, So we're just going to disregard all people that think in like mythology and different religions and all that stuff. It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It's counterintuitive.
I don't blame people for believing in things. I have my own personal beliefs that somebody would probably think are crazy, just as crazy. I have my own personal beliefs, but my personal beliefs are not things that threaten other people.
Right.
I'm very much influenced by spiritualists and atheists the same. Some atheists, I think definitely look at the entire spiritual phenomenon as a whole bunch of mindlessness. And I understand, I get that. But there are certain things that I still cling on to. I don't necessarily, I do believe that there is something that gave design to all of this, But it's funny because I also have the little atheist part of me. It's like, well, there's people who say that that's not necessarily so. I have that, but in the midst of all of this, it's still hard for me to believe that this is a random act of chance.
That gets, when I think about that stuff, if you think about the universe, just how big it truly is, like what else is out there, like, and how did we come from where we came from to get to here? And there's got to be a belief of there's something somewhere, and spiritual or not spiritual, I sometimes go back and forth on it, but
I mean, that's the thing about it. It's, you feel different ways at different times. You have certain knowledge at certain times. You don't. I know what it is to be ignorant of things that eventually became very important things to me. So it's like, the way I look at it is, I don't care. I would never say that a person shouldn't have their own beliefs. But they should be your own. They should be of your own volition. Like, they shouldn't be something that somebody's just kind of like opened your mind and just implanted something that you take wholesale. That you're just like, oh, well, it has to be true because somebody told me that. And then you read things and then you question them and feel bad for questioning them.
Yeah.
I felt bad for a lot of the questions that I asked early in my life. I'd just be like, wait a second. How does a guy survive in a whale?
Right.
That's, I mean, this was in the class and I'm sitting there in this class and I want to ask this question, but I don't want to look like I'm some sort of like troublemaker. I've always been a pretty good kid. I've never... I've never been arrested or anything like that. I've always been, I never really wanted to make waves. My dad was a state police officer. So I've never even got a speeding ticket. You know what I mean?
Really?
That's how closely I pay attention to the law. I don't do it perfectly, but at the same time, I'm very cognizant and very mindful of the way I look. When I was growing up in Africa, my dad from an early age kind of put it in my head that, being like one of the only black people, that I felt like some sort of an ambassador, so to speak.
Right.
So I wanted to give off a good image.
Yeah, you had to be the good example because you were the only one. So
I mean, and there was others, but specifically for my dad and just the way, the way he came up, he wanted us to be looked at well. And that's not a bad thing at all.
No, that's good.
That's a good thing. I get it and I'm with it. But it's like how we were talking about earlier, how even things that are predominantly good can have negative consequence.
Right.
And that, part of that became, I was very afraid to do a lot of things when I was growing up that I wanted to do and wanted to see if it was for me, but I know how it will look.
Yeah.
And over time, I lost a lot of that need to be seen as a particular person. And, I think even that, something that as much as like imagery of who you are still comes to a place of religion. It still comes to this place of, are you a respectable, upstanding human being? Are you, and eventually, you start to find out that that's kind of like a code word for, are you a good Christian? Like,
what I always thought, one thing, so you can be saved, right, on a certain, what is it, Easter?
You can be saved whenever.
All right. So your sins are forgiven,
supposedly,
and
even
so
if
you could
sins
be a serial killer for 40 years of your life, and one day you believe, and they can wash away your sins and you're going to go to heaven.
That's
a crazy mindset to me.
Listen to this. This is even worse. The other day I saw an article about a priest who had been raping a girl who was asking for forgiveness while he raped her. That's how real the situation of, all I have to do is say a couple of Hail Marys, or all I have to do is ask for forgiveness or something like that. When you can bail yourself out like that, you have almost zero moral responsibility.
Right.
You can, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did this. I still want to get into heaven. No, I know I just went on a serial rape spree, but I still want to get in the pearly gates. So, Jesus, you forgive me, right? And Jesus, if Jesus was a real person, he'd be like, no, you can't come in here. You rape people. You know what I mean? But that's not how they see it. And that's the thing about when you take a mythology and you make it literal, and people can do some very strange things. Like I said about Scientology, it doesn't take long to make people believe something that
and Scientology is crazy.
Yeah. And,
crazy stuff going on there.
There's some things going on there that now the world sees.
Yes.
The world sees that, okay, yes, you're free to have your own beliefs, but you're not free to abuse people.
Right.
That's not what freedom of religion is about. That's what this country was founded on, that concept. There's a lot of people who tell you, no, this is a Christian nation. It always has. It's like you don't know anything about history then. You don't know that these people, from the jump, Europe's involvement here had to do with people who felt religiously persecuted. And then they came here and persecuted other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's when you look at I know that predates the concept of America, but even those people, a lot of those people were deists, and they were people who weren't what people would call traditionally Christian. Thomas Jefferson created his own version of the Bible. You know what I mean? Because he saw a whole bunch of stuff he thought was trash and was just like, nah, I'm just gonna get rid of that part and this. And, so
you got to wonder how many interpretations of the Bible there has been over the years.
One of the best pieces of information or things that my dad has ever taught me, he said, there's as many religions as there are people. There's as many interpretations of the Bible as there are people, because you live your life, you learn how you perceive things, and then as time goes on, you use that perception to frame something like your religion. Mm-hmm. And when you frame it in a certain way where you can frame your religion to be, all people, I think, are trying to substantiate their religion. Mm-hmm. They're trying to say, okay, this is perfect, and even in the face of the fact that I'm coming into contact with a world that would say that this is not perfect and that there are untrue things coming in here,
they're constantly trying to validate it.
Yeah, and they have to. They have to continuously do it, and that's where something like religion and science are fundamentally different. When people are wrong in science, say, okay, I was wrong. But when somebody points out a problem with the Bible, whether that be some sort of a moral problem or it could be just something that doesn't make sense with differing stories and things like that, people, they have to. That's what apologists are for. They're there to explain away things that really can't be explained away. You can't explain away something saying one thing and then saying the complete opposite of that thing. Right. When they talk about God, they say, people always say, God is love. God is love, all loving. He's all loving. But how do you murder? How do you create an act of genocide and be all loving? There's no there's no thing that can do that. It's what I remember Dan Barker. He's he's a well-known atheist. He came out, I believe, on the Oprah show back in the 80s, and as a preacher who had come out as a non-believer. Because you got to think that that's a recent thing.
Right.
People weren't always ballsy enough to really do that.
Well, it's just different time now.
It's a different time.
It allows you to
the world is educated enough to not completely shun these people, even though they do go through a whole lot of stuff.
Can't imagine their families and their church fellowship shunning them, and not having friends that they thought were friends, but they were only friends because they were their preacher.
Richard Dawkins, he helped to found the what they call the Clergy Project, and that's where it's a forum, or it at least started out as a forum for pastors and that had lost their faith, and they needed people to talk to. They needed somebody to, they needed to talk to each other as a support system, because you're literally dealing with your livelihood.
Yeah.
You could be fired, and your family might get thrown out on the street, and all these people who were your connection no longer are your connection. That's one of the things that I've never really kind of recovered from. The idea, I've never recovered from the sense of community in certain places, having people who would want to see you succeed, and then when you come out of that sense of community doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Because these people, they don't want to hear it anymore. They'd much rather act like I wasn't saying anything at all than to possibly begin to contemplate the things that I was saying.
And that kind of stuff, that mindset is just crazy to me. You're a different, they think you're a different person. They don't even know you, right? Yeah. You're no longer Will. You're somebody else. And it's
I'm the same person.
It's not like you're going and becoming a crack dealer.
Yeah.
You just
I didn't kill anybody.
you in general, your morals are still the same. You're still, leading a productive life and trying to do good, but you just believe in a different way.
The way that it absolutely, I think, hurt me the most was in the sense that my family, not just people my parents and, but, my extended family. When I started to say these kinds of things, the worst thing was that they started to devalue my perspective.
Yeah.
They'd be like, oh, well, he already says crazy stuff, so maybe we shouldn't listen to anything that he has to say. So, that's that. I think that more so than anything, it's kind of like, I was very hurt by that, and it became sort of my fire. Mm-hmm. This isn't something that I easily shut up about, because it has such a personal attachment to me that I can go on forever talking about it, because I hate it when people try to act